Part 1, the classroom filled with students from different worlds. They came in all shapes and sizes, some walking on 2 legs, others on 4, and a few floating through the air. The Galactic Xenobiology Institute was one of the most famous schools in the known universe. It sat on Station Kepler 7, a massive space station that orbited a distant star. Professor Velthar entered the room with confident steps. The professor had blue scales that shimmered under the lights and 4 arms that moved with practiced grace. The Quilnari species was known for being excellent teachers, and Velthar was considered one of the best. Today's lesson would be about apex predators from different worlds. Jake Morrison sat near the middle of the classroom. He was the only human in the entire institute. Earth had just joined the galactic community 3 months ago, and Jake was part of the first cultural exchange program. His brown hair was slightly messy, and he wore the standard student uniform that had been adjusted to fit human proportions. At 22 years old, he was excited to learn about alien worlds, though he noticed that most other students seemed nervous around him. Next to Jake sat Lyrix, a creature that looked like a tall rabbit standing on 2 legs. The Tenthari species had soft gray fur and large ears that picked up even the smallest sounds. Lyrix was friendly, but always seemed ready to run away at the first sign of danger. On Jake's other side was Krenwell, a being made of living crystal that glowed with soft blue light. The Vorthon species thought slowly but deeply, considering every angle of a problem before speaking. Professor Velthar clapped 2 of the 4 hands together. The sound echoed in the quiet room. All the students turned their attention to the front, where a large holographic display floated in the air. Good morning, students. Today we will study the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. Every world that has life also has predators. These hunters shaped how every species evolved. They are the reason you have eyes to see danger, ears to hear threats, and instincts to survive. The professor touched the display and an image appeared. It showed a massive creature that looked like a snake but was as thick as a tree trunk. Its scales were black with red patterns, and its mouth could open wide enough to swallow a vehicle. This is the Yargoth render from Quintus Prime. It hunts by sound. Let me play a recording of its hunting call. The professor pressed another button. A deep sound filled the room. It was so low that Jake felt it vibrate in his chest. The sound made his bones feel strange, like they wanted to shake apart. Around him, the other students showed clear signs of fear. Lyrix's fur stood straight up. Krenwell's blue glow became dim. Several students in the back rows moved their chairs closer together. Jake found it interesting. The sound was unusual and definitely made by something big. But he didn't feel scared. He felt curious. What kind of biology could produce such a deep sound? How did the creature use it to hunt? Notice the subsonic frequencies, Professor Velthar explained, pointing to wavy lines on the display. This sound travels through the ground. Small creatures feel it in their bones and become paralyzed with fear. They cannot move, cannot run. The render approaches slowly and swallows them whole. The next image showed a different creature. This one had 6 legs and was covered in sharp spikes. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness. The Shade Stalker from Midnight's Reach. This predator hunts in complete darkness. Listen to the sound it makes. A series of clicking noises came from the speakers. They were fast and rhythmic, like someone tapping their fingers on a table, but much louder and more aggressive. The clicks echoed and bounced around the room. Jake watched as several students covered their ears or ear equivalents. One student in the front actually got up and moved to a seat farther from the speakers. The clicking serves 2 purposes, the professor continued. First, it uses echolocation like your sonar technology. Second, the sound triggers panic in prey animals. They run without thinking, straight into the stalker's waiting jaws. More predators followed. The Thundermaw, whose roar could actually kill small animals by rupturing their internal organs. The Crimson Hunter, whose screech caused bleeding in the ears of anything that heard it. The Void Swimmer, whose call through water could stun fish from hundreds of meters away. With each recording, the class reacted with visible fear. Students shifted in their seats. Some wrapped their arms or appendages around themselves. Others stared at the door as if calculating how fast they could escape. The evolutionary response to predator sounds was clear and strong in every species present, except Jake. He watched with interest, taking notes on his datapad. He found the biology fascinating. Each predator had evolved unique ways to hunt based on their environment. The sounds were tools, just like claws or teeth. There was a logic to it all that made sense once you understood the science. Professor Velthar noticed Jake's calm demeanor. The professor's scales shifted slightly in color, showing curiosity. Humans were still a mystery to most of the galaxy. They had appeared suddenly with technology that shouldn't exist for such a young species. They were friendly but strange, with behaviors that didn't match their appearance. "These sounds are powerful," the professor said, addressing the whole class but watching Jake. "They are encoded in your DNA as warnings. Your ancestors heard these sounds and knew to hide, to run, to climb, to dig. These are the nightmares that shaped civilizations. Every species in this room evolved under the shadow of an apex predator." The professor paused, letting the words sink in. Then all four hands moved in a gesture of importance. "Today we have something special. The newest member world has provided recordings. From Earth, the human homeworld, we will hear their apex predators, the creatures that shaped humanity." Every head in the classroom turned to look at Jake. He felt their eyes on him but didn't understand why it was such a big deal. Earth had predators, sure. Every planet with life probably did. He wondered what they would play. Maybe a wolf howl? That would be pretty cool. Or perhaps a grizzly bear. Those were definitely impressive. Professor Velthar activated the recording with ceremonial care, as if unveiling something dangerous and important. The speakers came alive with a sound that cut through the air like a knife. It was a scream, long and high-pitched, that seemed to go on forever. The sound rose and fell, echoing like it was bouncing off canyon walls. It was eerie and wild, full of something primal and untamed. Around Jake, the alien students froze. Part 2, the scream filled every corner of the classroom. It bounced off the walls and seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound was designed by millions of years of evolution to travel through forests and mountains, to announce territory, to warn rivals, and to freeze prey in their tracks. Lyrics had gone completely still. His large eyes were wide open and his breathing had stopped. The Tenteri survival instinct had kicked in. Every part of his brain was screaming at him not to move, not to make a sound, not to be noticed by whatever made that terrible noise. Crenwell's crystal body had turned almost completely dark. It was a defense mechanism that the Vorthan species used when facing extreme danger. By dimming their light, they became harder to see. The normally bright blue glow was now barely visible, like a dying ember. Other students around the room showed similar reactions. Some had pressed themselves flat against their desks. A few had actually crawled under their seats. One student near the back had wrapped all 6 of their arms around their head, trying to block out the sound even though it had already ended. The silence after the scream was heavy and thick. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They were all waiting to see if the danger had passed, if the predator had moved on, if they were safe. Then Jake Morrison laughed. It was a genuine laugh, warm and completely relaxed. It bubbled up from his chest like he had just heard a good joke. The sound was so unexpected, so wrong in that moment of fear, that it shocked everyone more than the predator scream had. Professor Velthar stopped the recording immediately. All 4 of the professor's hands froze in the air. The blue scales shifted to a lighter shade, showing confusion and concern. "Mr. Morrison," the professor said carefully, speaking slowly like someone trying to defuse a bomb. "Perhaps you do not understand what you just heard. This is an apex predator from your own world, from Earth. This is the sound that should trigger fear in humans. This is what hunted your ancestors." Jake was still smiling. He wiped a small tear from the corner of his eye, the kind that came from laughing unexpectedly. "Oh, I understand perfectly, Professor. That's just a puma. We also call them mountain lions or cougars. There are actually like 12 different names for them depending on what part of the country you're in." He said it so casually, like he was identifying a type of bird or a common insect. The word "just" hung in the air like it was written in glowing letters. Lyrix's voice came out as barely a whisper. His vocal cords seemed to have trouble working. "Just? Yeah. They're really common in certain parts of North America. Beautiful animals, actually. They're big cats with tan fur and these amazing eyes. Really graceful when they move." Jake's tone was the same one someone might use to describe their neighbor's friendly dog. The class stared at him. Every single student was looking at the human like he had just said something impossible. Like he had claimed water wasn't wet or that stars weren't bright. The cognitive dissonance was visible on every face and expression equivalent. Professor Velthar's scales continued to shift colors, moving through shades of confusion. "You're telling me that your species shares territory with these creatures?" That you live in the same areas where they hunt? Well, yeah. I mean, they were there first, technically. We built our towns and cities in their territory. Most of the time, they avoid us. They're pretty shy, actually. My Uncle Danny lives in Colorado up in the mountains, and he gets a mountain lion walking through his backyard maybe once or twice a month. The professor's scales had now turned almost white. And what does your uncle do when this happens? He watches it from the window. Makes sure his cat is inside. Sometimes he takes pictures if the lighting is good. He's got this whole photo album of the same mountain lion over the years. He named her Sandy because of her color. Complete silence filled the room, the kind of silence that was heavy with disbelief. Crenwell's internal light pulsed once, twice, then began to glow a bit brighter. The Vorthon was thinking, processing information, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. This creature that makes such sounds, how large is it? Jake thought for a moment, trying to remember the facts from a nature documentary he had watched years ago. Adult males are usually about 6 to 8 feet long if you include the tail. They weigh maybe 150 to 200 pounds. Females are a bit smaller, maybe 100 to 140 pounds. They're built for climbing and jumping, really muscular. Lyrix's ears had started to tremble. And you consider this small? I mean, it's not small exactly, but it's not huge either. They're definitely powerful for their size. Pound for pound, they're probably stronger than humans, but they hunt deer and elk mostly. Sometimes smaller stuff like rabbits or raccoons. They really prefer to avoid people? Prefer to avoid? Professor Velthar repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. This implies that sometimes they do not avoid people? Well, sure, occasionally there are encounters. Usually it's because someone surprised them on a hiking trail, or got too close to their cubs or cornered them by accident. If a mountain lion feels threatened, it can definitely fight. They've got sharp claws and teeth, but attacks on humans are really rare. You're statistically more likely to get struck by lightning than killed by a mountain lion. Jake pulled out his datapad and tapped on it a few times. Yeah, I'm looking it up now. In the last 100 years, there have been fewer than 30 fatal mountain lion attacks in North America. That's out of millions of people living in mountain lion territory. Professor Velthar pulled up an image on the holographic display. It showed a mountain lion in full detail. The creature was caught mid-stride, muscles visible under sleek fur. Its eyes were focused and intelligent. The teeth were sharp and clearly designed for tearing meat. The claws were extended, hooked, and dangerous. Every aspect of its body screamed predator to anyone who looked at it. The class collectively moved back in their seats. Some students actually pushed their chairs several inches away from the display. One student made a high-pitched whimpering sound. Jake looked at the image with appreciation. Yeah, that's a good picture. Really shows how athletic they are. Look at those shoulder muscles. They can jump like 15 feet straight up into a tree. It's incredible. This terrifies you? Lyrix asked. His voice was shaking slightly. Part 3. Jake looked at the image of the mountain lion again, trying to see it through his classmate's eyes. To him, it was just a wild animal. Dangerous if you were stupid, sure, but mostly just trying to live its life. He had grown up learning about mountain lions in school, seeing them in documentaries, hearing about sightings in the news. They were part of the landscape like rivers or mountains. I mean, you respect them. You don't approach them or try to pet them or anything dumb like that. If you're hiking in mountain lion territory, you make noise so you don't surprise them. You keep small children close. You don't run if you see one because that triggers their chase instinct. But terrified? No, not really. The confusion on his classmates' faces was almost comical. They genuinely could not understand how a human could look at an apex predator and feel anything other than pure fear. Crenwell's light was pulsing in a pattern that Jake had learned meant deep thought. Jake Morrison, what would you classify as a dangerous predator on Earth? It was a good question. Jake leaned back in his chair and thought about it. Well, grizzly bears are serious business. They're huge, can weigh up to 800 pounds, and they're incredibly strong. You really don't want to mess with a grizzly. Polar bears are even worse because they'll actively hunt humans. They see us as food, which is pretty rare among Earth predators. He continued counting on his fingers. Saltwater crocodiles are terrifying. They're like living dinosaurs, super patient, and they can take down pretty much anything that comes to the water. Hippos kill more people in Africa than almost any other animal. But they're herbivores, so I don't know if that counts as a predator. Professor Velthar had pulled up a new screen and was taking notes quickly, with two hands while the other two gestured for Jake to continue. Then you've got big cats like lions, tigers, leopards, and jaguars. All of them are capable of killing humans. Wolves hunt in packs and are smart enough to use tactics. Bull sharks are aggressive and can swim in both salt and fresh water, so they show up in rivers sometimes. Great white sharks are massive and powerful. Killer whales are basically ocean wolves with bigger brains. Jake paused, thinking, oh, and some of the snakes are really dangerous. King cobras, black mambas, inland taipans. Their venom can kill you in minutes. Box jellyfish, blue-ringed octopuses, cone snails. Lots of venomous stuff in the ocean. The classroom had somehow become even quieter. If possible, the students looked more disturbed now than when they had heard the mountain lion scream. Lyrix's voice was small and frightened. How many apex predators does your world have? Jake scratched his head. That's hard to answer because it depends on how you define apex predator and what environment you're talking about. Each ecosystem usually has its own top predators. In the ocean, you've got sharks and killer whales. On land, you've got big cats and bears and wolves. In rivers and swamps, you've got crocodiles and alligators. In the air, eagles and hawks prey on smaller animals. He started using his datapad to pull up information. If we're counting all the major predators across all of Earth's biomes, you're probably looking at several dozen species. Maybe more if you count all the different subspecies and regional variants. Professor Velthar's scales had gone through so many color changes that they seemed unable to settle on a single shade. And humans evolved alongside all of these? Yeah, well, not all at once in the same place. Human ancestors evolved in Africa, which had lions and leopards and hyenas and crocodiles. As humans spread across the world, we encountered different predators in different regions. Cave bears in Europe, tigers in Asia, jaguars in South America. We learned to deal with each one. Jake pulled up a map of Earth on his datapad and projected it onto the holographic display. He pointed to different regions. See, this is what made humans successful. We're adaptable. We learned to read animal behavior and predict their patterns. We used tools and fire to protect ourselves. We built shelters and worked in groups. We turned our big brains into our main survival advantage. Crenwell's light had stabilized into a steady glow. This explains much. Your species did not evolve avoiding a single predator. You evolved competing with many predators, multiple threats, different environments, constantly. I guess so. I never really thought about it that way. Jake looked at the faces around him and realized something important. Wait, are you guys saying that most species only had one main predator on their homeworlds? Professor Velthar nodded slowly. Yes, the Quilnari evolved on a water world. Our main threat was the sea razors, large predatory fish that hunted in the shallow waters where our ancestors lived. That single threat shaped our entire evolutionary psychology. The professor gestured to Lyrics. The Tenthari had the sky raptors, large flying predators that hunted from above. This is why Tenthari have such excellent hearing, and why they instinctively avoid open spaces. The Vorthan had the meltworms, Crenwell added, creatures that could bore through rock to reach our crystalline ancestors. We evolved our hardness and our ability to dim our light as defenses against this single threat. Around the room, other students began to speak up, sharing their species' evolutionary nightmares. Each one described a single predator, or perhaps a pair of related species that had shaped their entire civilization's development. Jake listened with growing understanding. These species had evolved playing a very different game than humans. They had one monster to avoid, one set of behaviors to learn, one fear encoded in their genes. Humans had dozens, hundreds if you counted all the smaller predators and venomous creatures. That's why you guys seem so cautious all the time, Jake said, things clicking into place. When I first got here, I thought maybe I smelled bad or something. But you're not scared of me specifically. You're just more risk-averse in general. Lyrics nodded, his ears still flat against his head. When you walk through the lower station levels, you do not hesitate. When you handle equipment marked as dangerous, you barely pause. When you speak with the station security forces, you show no deference or fear. We thought you were either incredibly brave or completely insane. Neither, Crenwell said, his light pulsing with certainty. He is simply human. His species' baseline for danger is calibrated differently than ours. What we perceive as risky behavior is normal to him. Part 4. Professor Velthar sat down heavily in the chair behind the desk. This was unusual because Quilnari teachers almost never sat during lectures. They preferred to move around using all four arms to gesture and emphasize points. Seeing the professor sit down made the whole class pay even closer attention. Students, I believe we need to reconsider our entire understanding of humanity. The professor's voice was quiet, but firm. When Earth first made contact with us 6 months ago, we evaluated them based on standard protocols. We looked at their technology level, their social structures, their aggression indices. We cleared them for integration into galactic society. The professor pulled up a series of charts and graphs on the holographic display. But we missed something fundamental. We failed to properly analyze their evolutionary context. One of the charts showed different planets and their predator counts. Most worlds had 1 or 2 bars on the graph. Earth's bar went off the chart. Most sentient species evolved under pressure from one apex predator. Sometimes 2 if they lived in a region where different ecosystems met. This created a focused survival instinct. We learned to fear a specific type of threat. Our nightmares have a single face. Professor Velthar manipulated the display to show Earth's biodiversity data. Several students made sounds of distress when they saw the numbers. Earth has an unusually high concentration of apex predators. Look at this data. In a single continent, North America, there are multiple species of bears, several big cat species, wolves, coyotes, alligators, and various other predators. And that is just the land animals. The oceans around Earth contain dozens of predatory shark species, aggressive cetaceans, and large predatory fish. The professor stood up again, energy returning as the implications became clear. Humanity did not evolve to avoid a single threat. They evolved to compete with, understand, and coexist with dozens of deadly species, in different environments, with different hunting strategies, all at the same time. Jake felt a bit uncomfortable being the center of attention like this. He had never thought of humans as special. Every species on Earth seemed normal to him because it was all he had ever known. The idea that other worlds were safer, easier, less dangerous was strange to consider. We learned to read patterns, Jake offered, trying to help his classmates understand. Predators are smart, but they're also predictable in some ways. They follow instincts and behaviors that make sense for their species. A mountain lion hunts differently than a bear. A shark behaves differently than a crocodile. Once you understand how an animal thinks and what it wants, it becomes less scary. Less scary, Lyrics repeated, his voice filled with wonder and a bit of horror. You are describing creatures that could kill you, and you say they are less scary once you understand them. Well, yeah. Fear is usually based on not knowing what will happen. If you know how a predator behaves, you can predict what it will do. You can avoid situations where you might threaten it. You can recognize warning signs. Knowledge reduces fear. Crenwell's entire body was glowing brightly now, a sign of intense thought and excitement. This is remarkable. Humans developed a learning-based fear response instead of an instinct-based one. You can override your fear with knowledge. I guess so, Jake said. I mean, we still feel fear. If a grizzly bear charged at me, I would definitely be terrified. But I also know that if I play dead and protect my neck, I have a better chance of surviving than if I run or fight. That knowledge exists alongside the fear. Professor Velthar was typing rapidly on a datapad, recording everything. This has massive implications for human integration into galactic society. Our psychological profiles and risk assessments are all based on species with single predator evolutionary backgrounds. Humans operate on completely different parameters. A student in the back row, a floating jellyfish-like creature named Prill, spoke up in a musical voice. Does this mean humans are more dangerous than we thought? The classroom went silent. It was the question everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to ask. Jake felt his stomach twist. He did not want his classmates to be afraid of him. No, I mean, humans can be dangerous if we want to be. We're good at fighting when we need to, but we're also good at cooperating and making friends. The same skills that helped us survive predators also help us understand other species and work together. Professor Velthar nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Morrison makes a good point. Humanity had to develop sophisticated social structures to survive on Earth. They needed communication, cooperation, and empathy to protect each other from multiple threats. These same traits make them excellent candidates for galactic society. The professor pulled up images of human cities, showing massive populations living peacefully together. Look at this. Billions of humans living in close proximity with relatively low violence rates. They have laws, ethics, and social contracts that govern behavior. Yes, they have conflicts, but so does every species. What is remarkable is how well they cooperate despite their evolutionary background. Crenwell's light pulsed in agreement. Jake Morrison has been nothing but kind since arriving at the Institute. He helps other students with difficult assignments. He shows patience when we do not understand human cultural references. He shares his food even though our biology means we cannot always eat it. Lyric's ears had finally come up from their flattened position. This is true. Jake saved me when I got stuck in the maintenance shaft last month. He did not hesitate even though the space was small and dark and there could have been danger. There wasn't any real danger, Jake said, embarrassed. You just needed help reaching the access panel. Anyone would have done the same thing. But anyone did not, Professor Velthar said softly. You did. And I am beginning to understand why. The situations we perceive as dangerous do not register the same way in your mind. Your threat assessment was calibrated by grizzly bears and mountain lions and sharks. A dark maintenance shaft does not compare. The professor walked to where Jake sat and placed one hand gently on his shoulder. It was a gesture of respect in Quilnari culture. Mr. Morrison, would you be willing to help me with a research project? I want to study how humans process risk and fear compared to other species. Your perspective could help us better understand not just humanity, but also ourselves. By seeing how different we are, we can better appreciate how our own evolution shaped us. Jake smiled. Sure, Professor. That sounds interesting. Do I need to fill out forms or something? I will handle the paperwork. For now, let us continue the lesson. I have recordings from several other worlds to share, though I suspect they will all seem much less impressive after our discussion today. Part 5, the class continued. But the atmosphere had changed completely. Now when Professor Velthar played the predator sounds from other worlds, there was a new context. After each recording, students would look at Jake to see his reaction. They were trying to calibrate their own fear responses against his. When the professor played the hunting call of the Zareth Ripper, a sound that made 3 students actually leave the classroom in distress, Jake just tilted his head thoughtfully. That's interesting. The frequency pattern is similar to a wolf howl. I bet it serves the same purpose, calling pack members together for a coordinated hunt. When they heard the shriek of the phantom glider, a sound that made even Crenwell's solid crystal form vibrate with discomfort, Jake nodded appreciatively. Good acoustic design. That would echo through canyons and confuse prey about where the predator is actually located. Pretty smart. By the end of the class, the other students had relaxed somewhat. They were beginning to understand that Jake was not judging them for their fear. He did not think they were weak. He simply came from a place where the baseline of danger was completely different. As students filed out of the classroom, Lyrics walked beside Jake. The Tenthari was quiet for a long moment before speaking. Jake Morrison, I have been observing you since you arrived at the Institute. I watched you handle plasma cutters in engineering class without the trembling that affects most students. I saw you volunteer to go into the lower station levels to retrieve equipment, areas where many of us fear to go because of the darkness and confined spaces. I noticed you speak to the station security forces as equals, showing no submission or fear. Lyrics paused at an intersection in the corridor, his large eyes reflecting the station lights. Today I understand that it is not courage or madness. You are simply human, and humans are terrifying. Jake stopped walking and turned to face his friend fully. Lyrics, I'm not terrifying. I promise. I'm just a guy who grew up on a planet with some really interesting wildlife. Interesting, Lyrics said softly. You call them interesting. We would call them nightmare fuel. Crenwell joined them, his crystal body refracting light in beautiful patterns. Lyric speaks truth, but perhaps phrases it incorrectly. You are not terrifying, Jake Morrison, but your capabilities are far beyond what we initially assessed. Your species' potential has been greatly underestimated. They continued walking toward the cafeteria together. Jake found himself thinking about home for the first time in weeks. He thought about hiking trips with his father in the Rocky Mountains, walking through forests where mountain lions and bears lived. He remembered camping trips where they would hang their food in trees to keep it away from animals. He thought about swimming in lakes despite knowing there might be snapping turtles or water snakes in the weeds. None of it had ever seemed dangerous at the time. It was just normal life on Earth. You learned the rules, you respected nature, and you enjoyed the beauty of the world around you. The danger was always there, but it was manageable. Understandable. You know what I miss most about Earth? Jake said as they walked. The sounds at night. When you're camping in the mountains, you can hear coyotes howling in the distance, owls hooting in the trees. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you hear a wolf pack singing together. It's beautiful. Lyric shuddered. Those are predator sounds. You find them beautiful? Yeah. They're part of nature. They're animals communicating with each other, marking territory, calling their families. It's like listening to the Earth itself talk. I miss that. The station is too quiet. They reached the cafeteria and got their food. Jake had learned which alien dishes his digestive system could handle, and which ones made him sick. He grabbed something that looked like blue pasta and some kind of protein that tasted vaguely like chicken. As they sat down to eat, other students began approaching their table. This was new. Usually other species kept a respectful distance from Jake, not out of rudeness but out of uncertainty about human social customs and maybe a bit of instinctive caution. A student named Kix, who looked like a small floating brain inside a protective membrane, hovered near the table. "Jake Morrison, may I ask a question?" "Sure, go ahead." "On Earth, with so many predators, how did humans become dominant species? Why did predators not hunt humans to extinction?" It was a good question. Jake thought about it while chewing his blue pasta. "Well, humans are not the biggest or strongest or fastest, but we have big brains and we work together really well. Our ancestors learned to use tools, make fire, build shelters. They worked in groups to protect each other. They passed knowledge down through generations." He gestured with his fork, warming to the subject. "And we learned from the predators too. We watched how wolves hunted in packs and adopted similar tactics. We saw how big cats ambushed prey and learned to be careful in tall grass or dense forest. We observed and adapted and survived. But you also domesticated some predators," Crenwell said. The professor mentioned this in a previous lecture. "Humans turned wolves into dogs," Jake grinned. "Yeah, that's true. Thousands of years ago, some wolves started hanging around human settlements, eating our leftovers. The friendliest ones got fed more. Over time, we basically turned them into a new species. Dogs are technically domesticated wolves. We took a predator and made it into our best friend." The students at the table stared at him. The concept was so alien to them that they struggled to process it. "You took a predator and made it family," Lyric said slowly. "You brought predators into your homes. Well, they're not really predators anymore. Dogs are friendly and loyal. They protect us and we take care of them. It's a partnership." Jake pulled out his datapad and showed them pictures of his family's dog, a golden retriever named Buddy. "This is my dog back home. He's the sweetest animal you'll ever meet. He likes belly rubs and playing fetch." The picture showed a large animal with golden fur, its mouth open in what humans recognized as a happy expression, but which looked to the alien students like bared teeth. "That is a predator's smile," Priel said, the jellyfish student floating closer to look at the image. "You can see the teeth. He's not smiling because he wants to bite anyone. Dogs smile when they're happy. It's body language." Jake swiped through more pictures. "See, here he is sleeping on my bed. Here he is playing with my little nephew. Dogs are part of human families." Professor Velthar entered the cafeteria and spotted their table. The professor came over carrying a tray of food. "May I join you?" "Of course, Professor," Jake said, making room. The professor sat down and looked at the gathered students. "I see word of today's lesson has spread. I have been receiving messages from other faculty members asking about the discussion." "What did you tell them?" Crenwell asked. "I told them the truth. That we have fundamentally misunderstood humanity's baseline parameters. That our entire assessment framework needs revision." The professor took a bite of food. "I have also sent a priority message to the Galactic Council. They need to know that humans operate on different risk calculations than we assumed.